Borthakur IAS Academy প্রস্তুতি আৰু অধ্যয়নৰ নিৰ্ভৰযোগ্য ঠিকনা Borthakur IAS Academy.
Hello everyone, this is Funny. Welcome to Borthakur IAS Academy. This is our daily Hindu analysis class for 22nd September 2021. Let us begin with the first article for today. So to be very clear, this is an article from yesterday's newspaper that talks about a Cold War, a potentially new Cold War between China and United States. This is relevant today because yesterday Biden gave his first speech at United Nations, his first speech as President of USA. So in that speech, he talked about how they don't want a Cold War with China. Before going into that article, let us understand what the UN chief is talking about here. UN chief wants China, US to avoid a Cold War. Before going into the article, before going into what the UN chief is saying, let us understand what Cold War is. So Cold War is nothing but a geopolitical tension that existed between Soviet Union, erstwhile Soviet Union, current Russia, and its satellite states, mostly East European countries, and the United States and its allies. So it was not a physical war, but it was a war of tactics, it was a war of sanctions, it was a war of spying. Everything under the sun except a full blown out physical military war was present during Cold War. Now, the idea or the reason as to why Cold War existed during that era between Soviet Union and United States boils down to the fact of dissimilar ideologies, right? On one side you have Soviet Union with its own ideologies, on the other side you have United States and its allies with their own ideas and principles, right? The Cold War was entirely fought on the basis was to gain supremacy over others' ideologies, right? Both were fighting to set up or establish and maintain their own ideologies in nations. This developed post World War II. Particularly, this kind of got started during the split or the division of Berlin, right? Where we saw Germany being split into two, East Germany and West Germany, and this is where we saw Germany on one side, which was being controlled by Soviet Union, had the communist policies. On the other side, you had West Germany, which had allies policy, that is democracy and etc. Again, the supremacy was to establish their own idea, and this was to kind of have control over post-war security in the world. This came right on the heels at the end of World War II. So what were the Western allies included, right? You had US and its allies. So they were particularly from North Atlantic Treaty. They emanated out of NATO, and the idea was that, or their ideology that they favored was democratic system. But underlyingly, though we have to say it in an open way, the right word to be used here is a capitalistic system of governance or a capitalistic system of market. So they favored democracy and capitalism. As well, on the other side, you have Soviet Union, which was very hell-bent on installing communism wherever it went, right? It wanted communist governments in the countries that were being controlled by Soviet Union, right? That is why we saw most of the Eastern European countries had communism as their system in their country while they were under the influence of Soviet Union. So who were these allied countries? During World War, the allied countries were US, UK, France, and on the other side you had Soviet Union and its Eastern European allies. Now what happened during World War II was these factions, the Western Bloc and the so-called Eastern Bloc, which was made up of the Soviets and the US allied nations, came together. They saw a common enemy in the form of Germany, right? Particularly Nazi Germany, which was Hitler's Germany. They saw that this was an unified force, this was a cause worth unifying for, and they unified for it despite having very different ideologies and IDS. So they came together and they fought against the Axis powers. Who were the Axis powers? Nazi Germany, Japan and Austria. So both Allied countries and Soviet Union came together and fought these Axis powers. Now, when the war ended, right, you had the alliance, you had the Allied countries and Soviet Union fighting these Axis powers, and when the Allied nations along with Soviet Union defeated Axis powers, right, you had Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany was, whether you agree it or not, was entirely defeated by Russian forces. Japan, you know what happened, they did Pearl Harbor and America said, good, you attacked our harbor, now we are going to scar you for centuries together, and they dropped two hydrogen bombs on their territory. Now Austria, it's the same case. Austria was also defeated by Allied and Soviet forces. Now this alliance worked brilliantly when they had a common enemy. But post World War II, when the post World War II order was being established, again the tough war kind of started. The idea supremacy kind of started. You had allied countries trying to get democracy going in certain countries. On the other side, you had Soviet Union that wanted to establish communism. So that is where this friction, the unity that these countries had during World War II kind of fell apart post World War II. And there were multiple other factors. Soviet Union did not trust American tactics. America was very coy about what they used in the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. So Russia didn't trust that. And there were other multiple issues that led to the fall of that led to the split of this union, that is the Allied countries and the Soviet Union coming together. So that was the reason that this union did not work. But what started or what is attributed to the beginning of Cold War is the Truman Doctrine. You had Truman as the president of United States at that point of time. On March 12th of 1947, Truman announced a doctrine called the Truman Doctrine, or he came out with a policy that talked about stopping expansion of communism and imperialism in the world. So what was the Truman Doctrine? When Truman was president of United States in 1947, he came out with an official US policy that had the mandate of preventing the growth of communism and imperialism. What was Soviet Union trying to do? It was trying to improve, sow the seeds of communism and imperialistic endeavors. So what was the Truman Doctrine was? It was essentially a policy to put an end to Soviet Union's communism expansion plans, like what China is trying to do now, but with economic and with economy, and similarly communism also. Russia was doing it at that point of time, but far more successfully than what China is doing right now. Just keep this in mind. China at this juncture is nowhere near to what Soviet Union was during that point of time, and it would take a lot of time and resources for China to reach to that point. Remember, Russia was the only force in the world at that point of time that could go toe to toe with United States. China thinks it can, but in reality it cannot. See, it can go to extent, but it's only limited to regional. It is limited to Indo-Pacific. It might show force projection through Pacific Ocean also, or Atlantic Ocean also, but there are a lot of complexities, but that is to be discussed another point of time. But coming back to the Truman Doctrine, it talked about preventing expansion of Soviet Union. To respond to Truman Doctrine, so this was essentially the official start of Cold War, which kind of establishes why Iron Curtain came and the result of fall of or the collapse of Soviet Union. So in a bid to oppose the Truman Doctrine, or a bid to push back America and its intentions in the region, Russia came up with the concept of Iron Curtain. What is Iron Curtain? It is a political, military, ideological barrier that was erected by Soviet Union right after World War II to seal itself and its independent Eastern Central European allies from having any open contact with the West. You can look at the picture. You have on the red the Western Bloc, on the blue you have the Eastern Bloc. Eastern Bloc is the US, and the red you have Soviet Union. The white line that you are seeing in between the blue and the red is the Iron Curtain. Iron Curtain is a ideological kind of a barrier, but there were literal borders there, but nonetheless the ideological barrier was that people from the red side should not meet and mingle with the people on the blue side. So that was the intent behind the Iron Curtain. So that was what was going on through the entire phase of Cold War, where one were trying to steal the secrets of the others were trying to steal the secrets of other. You had defections of spy, you had defections of scientists. That went on for certain period. But in 1991, Soviet Union collapsed. Right? There were multiple factors that led to the collapse of Soviet Union. Afghanistan was certainly one of those. But at the end of the Cold War, which ended with the collapse of Soviet Union in 1991, one of the superpowers in the world was weakened. So at the end of the day, US reigned supreme and Soviet Union fell and split into so many other countries, and Soviet Union became Russia. So at that point of time, the Cold War came to an end because there were no other powers to go and have an engagement at that level engagement with America. So the superpowers were gone. Only one superpower remained in that world at that point of time. So that was the end of the Cold War. Now let us come to the article that we started with. So I hope you have a clear understanding of what is Cold War, what was the Cold War 1.0, and what is the Cold War 2.0 that UN General Secretary and President Biden are talking about. So first let us discuss about the UN General Secretary statement. So he is saying that both the countries are having rival geopolitical and military strategies, and that difference would pose dangers and would certainly divide the world. Now he is saying that we need to avoid at all costs a Cold War that would be different from the past one and probably more dangerous and more difficult to manage. This part you have to agree with it. So there were certain limitations during Cold War 1.0, the old Cold War. Technology wasn't that big. If and when things got hot, the only way out of it would have been a military confrontation. But things are a little bit different now, drastically different to be pretty honest. We have technology, we have weapons that the nuclear weapons are kind of the second equation, but nonetheless these conventional weapons that we have right now are far more damage inflicting than what they had at that point of time. And mind you, as I said, if Cold War 1.0 that US and Soviet Union had, if it escalated, it would have been a full blown out war, World War III. The outcome, it is debatable, but what this war, if a new Cold War between China and US starts, it would be mostly fought online. Right, technology based war, which is far more devastating. It could cost of more deaths, more economy than a conventional war. That is why we should avoid a new Cold War at all costs, and we should ensure that these two countries that are having differences amicably sort them out. So this is what UN chief was saying. Yesterday, as I said, President Biden was giving a speech at United Nations General Assembly. Now, what was he saying during this speech? As I told, this was the first address that he was able to give at the UN General Assembly after he became the President of America. Now he is saying that America was not seeking a new Cold War in reference to the tensions between the US and China. So that is one thing. He has used this platform to effectively communicate the intent of American policy. What he is saying is, yes, recently because of the tensions between China and United States, there is a scope that everybody might be thinking that US wants a new Cold War, but in reality, US is not at all seeking a new Cold War. Despite having differences, we are not seeking a new Cold War. As I said, he is using this platform to essentially allay fears of his American allies and also set the tone for American policy for the next coming few years, at least next 1 or 2 decades. In the sense, if you go by the Biden policy, it might be like that, but nonetheless, for at least till his presidency, he is kind of setting the tone for the American foreign policy. So he is saying that first, we don't want Cold War with China. He also said that in regards to Afghanistan, we are closing a chapter on relentless war. What has been the relentless war? It has been Iraq, it has been Afghanistan. Relentlessly for the past few decades, America has been at war with one country or the other. Whether the opposite country is fighting or not is a second entirely different question, but nonetheless, America was at war. Now, with its exit from Afghanistan, it is opening a new chapter on diplomacy, development, and renewing democracy. So, what was the subliminal message here? We are no longer interested in the Middle East. We are focusing on Indo-Pacific region. Since we have been discussing these topics for the last few months or so, we can see American policy shifting towards Indo-Pacific from Middle Eastern or Eastern, Middle East to be very specific. So that is what he's saying. On one, we don't want Cold War. Two, we are closing our chapter of relentless war, and we have exited ourselves from the Afghanistan, and we are shifting towards opening a new chapter on diplomacy, development, and renewing democracy. So without naming China, he's offering a possible way out to China here. Not a way out, but he's offering a possible solution that could actually materialize into reality by saying that United States is ready to work with any nation that steps up and pursues peaceful resolution to shared challenges, even if we have intense disagreement in other areas. So you have to insert all the opponents of United States in this regard. You can insert China, you can insert Russia, you can insert Iran. Currently, the friction seems to be boiling over 3 people. One is Russia, the China, and the Iran. Russia, okay, that has been going on for the last few decades, but China is one thing that everybody is talking about. Underlyingly, you have Iran with its nuclear agreement. So, one of the biggest fallouts that we discussed post-Afghanistan or the post-exit US exit from Afghanistan was how its allies were scared or apprehensive about trusting America. Right? You had Taiwan, you have Japan, you have South Korea, you have Australia, you have all these Asian countries that were dependent on United States for providing security. You have Ukraine, which most people tend to forget, but Ukraine, you have an active situation in Ukraine too. So we said the trust deficit that these critical allies of US had in US when US announced, there were a lot of US in that statement, but nonetheless these allies were hoping that America would come to their aid when in need. But what ended up happening was when America announced abruptly that they are going to pull out of Afghanistan, and the subsequent fallout of its action in Afghanistan, where Taliban was effectively able to take control of the entire government within a span of a week or so, all the allies who were trusting and dependent on America providing its security cover were to a little extent shaken. You have seen China taunting these countries. The moment America pulled out of Afghanistan, you saw Global Times, which is a mouthpiece of Chinese Communist Party, making fun of Taiwan, claiming that even if we enter Taiwan tomorrow with our forces, with our armed forces, US is not going to come to the rescue of Taiwan. So despite America's and Western countries' inaction in Hong Kong, there was a lot of trust still intact on America and its security pacts. But with Afghanistan, that trust took a hit. The trust went into deficit. Now he is saying that again, he is trying to use this platform to reassure America's allies that America would vigorously stand up for its allies. Not only that, he's also saying that America would compete and stand up for its allies and oppose attempts by stronger countries to dominate weaker ones, where they are trying to either change the territory by take territory or change territory by force. Right, they were making changes to territory. What happened with Ukraine? Crimea was annexed by Russia. What is happening in Ladakh? China is sitting in territory of India. So these are the actions that they are talking about here. One is by force you are taking away territory. The second thing is using economic coercion, what China is essentially doing through its Belt and Road Initiative, where they are trapping countries in debt and they are forcing their those countries who are in debt. So to cover for the debt that they incurred because of One Belt One Road Initiative, these debt trapped countries are being forced to give up their natural resources to China at very low prices. Not only that, the technological exploitation or using information as a tool against other countries. So these are all the things that he kind of pointed out. Right, again he also warned an issue stating that the authoritarians of the world who may seek to proclaim the end of the age of democracy, but they are wrong. See what happened the moment China got the whiff of America pulling out of Afghanistan. Right, they started saying this is the kind of the end of democratic era. Look at they kind of started comparing the internal problems of America with China. When you had many internal tussles in America in regards to racial issues, the policing, whatever it may be, even the vaccine mandates, whatever it may be, there was a lot of internal strife inside America on aspects of individual rights and individual representation. So China was using this low moment in American history where you had the Capitol riots which took place in Washington DC, and they were saying that the democracy system, the idea of having a democracy has failed. They even went to the extent of the Red Fort incident where you had rioters getting into Red Fort and raising the flags of other organizations that are banned outfits, terrorist outfits in India. So China was actively comparing these incidences and saying that democracy as an idea, democracy as a concept has failed. Look at these countries who believed in the principles of democracy, and look at us who believed in the principles of communism and whatever they have believed. Look at how well functioning we are, how developed we are, how fast we are developing, and look at those countries. Again, he's using this platform to say that no, authoritarians of the world may seek to proclaim the end of age of democracy, but they are wrong. This is where things get a little bit interesting. When he was using the speech, he included words like cyber issues, emerging technologies, trade, and threat of terrorism on this list. Now terrorism is getting mainstay. This is what India has been saying for the last decade or so. Terrorism is bad. Terrorism in any form is bad. But we could not get across our point successfully. But with situation drastically changing in the regions around the world, terrorism is again at the forefront of discussion. Now the second interesting outcome of this speech is that he clearly stated at least his government's interest or his presidency interest that US is no longer going to use its military as a primary tool. Right? We are going to use US military as a tool of last resort, not our first. Now we are not going to use our military to be very specific, the US military, as an answer to every problem we see in the world. So this speech, right? So this is kind of an interesting speech. He's trying to counter the Chinese growth. He's trying to allay the fears of American allies. He's trying to set across the point that we are no longer going into wars, endless wars. We are not going to use our military, but if that doesn't mean that we are going to abandon our allies. Now, as far as the Iran thing is concerned, though US is willing to return to full compliance to the Iran nuclear deal, That is something to be discussed at a later point of time. But nonetheless, US is willing to join the return to the Iran nuclear deal, but a lot of things have to be ironed out before that becomes a reality. So this was in essence the speech that President Biden gave during United Nations Assembly. This is significant because this comes one day before the first in-person Quad meeting is set to take place. Today it's entirely international relations because given the backdrop, given the recent developments, and given the fact that our Prime Minister is in Washington DC, in New York and in United States to attend the General Assembly and also attend the first in-person meeting of Quad grouping. So that is what this speech is significant. It sets the tone for the next coming few days, which are going to be dominated by international relations for our exam perspective. So today we'll be covering all the articles. Most of the articles, or at least the next one or so article, is in regards to international relations. Now moving on to next. No link between AU, KUS and Quad. So this is our response to the Australia, UK and US Trilateral Security Alliance. One of the first questions that sprang up when the Trilateral Security Alliance was announced was, are they trying to sideline Quad as a grouping? Should India be worried about the AU, KUS grouping? Now Indian government is coming out saying that there is no link between AU, KUS and Quad. Both are different entities. Whereas where you have AU, KUS is a security alliance, and the Quad, it is a different kind of alliance. We both share, or they both share, different visions altogether. As I said, AU, KUS is a security alliance, Quad is a different group of countries. That is what. So there is no link between, and India is not worried about the grouping, this security alliance. You have Quad, right? It's about Indo-Pacific. That is the sentiment that we share. AU-KUS, again, it is a security alliance between Australia, UK and US. So India is essentially saying that America giving nuclear propulsion or nuclear propelled submarines to Australia is not an issue for us, because they have reached out to us, they have explained their case, we are happy with that explanation, and again they are just giving nuclear powered submarines. So this is not a case of nuclear proliferation, so we are not worried about it. That is the stance of Indian government in regards to this. Now let us explore a bit deep into why there is a lot of noise over AU-KUS, right? You have France on one hand saying all the things that they can say within limit. Again, they are following their protocols. On the other hand, you have China making all the noise in the world that it can, and it is hoping that somebody would listen, but sadly things are different in world order right now. So let us explore. So at the end of the day, it boils down to the fact of presence of a country in Indo-Pacific region, right? On one hand you have France, on the other hand you have United Kingdom. France, unlike United Kingdom, right, has been historically a part of Indo-Pacific power, right? Indo-Pacific architecture or Indo-Pacific matrix, because it has territories in Indo-Pacific and bases across the region. It has also participated in multinational naval exercises in the Bay of Bengal with 4 Quad partner nations, right? You have Malabar exercises, similar naval trilateral, bilateral, multilateral exercises that were taking place with Quad nations, without Quad nations, but nonetheless most of these countries were involved in one sequence or the other. So one of the first things that you have to understand is Quad is not a security arrangement, right? But the skepticism or the criticism, whatever you insert here, the idea is, one of the major criticisms against Quad is, until and unless it becomes or translates or transforms into a security arrangement, right, it is not going to achieve its goal of an free Indo-Pacific region. Though they don't say it directly, but without that security agreement or that security exchange or that security alliance idea in the Quad is not going to succeed in its objectives, right? Because the role of Quad is limited. The cooperation or the areas of cooperation without the security paradigm will be limited, and they cannot successfully counter the growth of Chinese militarization. So many would say you have Malabar exercise, right? But Malabar exercise is not a naval exercise. See, what Malabar exercises allows us, the countries that were participating, particularly India, is it provides a facility or a platform for our naval forces, right? You have Malabar exercises happening between multiple other countries. What it provides is it provides a platform for these navies to integrate, right? So that they can cooperate and communicate effectively, so that they can enhance and kind of develop an interoperability capabilities. Meaning, if and when in future all the participant countries in Malabar decide that they are going to unite together navally, right? They are going to unite their navies and they are going to fight whoever is on the opposite side. In that scenario, since they have been practicing with each other, communicating with each other, integrating with each other, interoperating with each other, if and when that situation arises, they can immediately dive into action. They don't need training, they don't need integration, because they have been practicing that for the last few years. That is the kind of edge that this exercise gives. But again, this is not a naval exercises. This is our cooperation, where we wanted to develop intercommunication and interoperability with other navies. Now let us look at AUKUS or AUKUS Pact, as somebody is calling it. Now the gist of AUKUS Pact is, it is going to facilitate the transfer of nuclear submarine propulsion and manufacturing technologies to Australia, right? When you look at it, it is a non-nuclear nation, which is Australia, acquiring nuclear capabilities. Mind you, they are not acquiring nuclear weapons, they are simply acquiring nuclear propulsion technologies for submarines. They are not getting nuclear weapons. This means that Australia is going to get nuclear submarines. Now, there was this other agreement, right, called ANZUS, that involved Australia, New Zealand and United States. So again, that was also a similar security alliance pact that existed between New Zealand, Australia and US. But in 1984, New Zealand walked out of the treaty, saying that they are going to be nuclear free. So it had a stance of nuclear free, and because of that stance, New Zealand walked out of that alliance. Now what happened? Instead of New Zealand, America replaced it with United Kingdom. Now this provides United Kingdom with an opportunity to reinsert itself into the happenings of Indo-Pacific. Earlier it had no skin in the game. Now because of this security alliance, UK found a footing in the happenings and found an entry into Indo-Pacific region. Though they were all part of an already existing agreement called Five Eyes, which is intelligence sharing alliance, but again it was primarily in between Anglo-Saxon countries, which were Australia, Canada, New Zealand, UK and the US. But this is very specific. This is very small, in the sense that only 3 countries are in this security alliance. To make it clear, prior to AUKUS, there was this agreement or security treaty called Australia, New Zealand and US. In 1984, because of its nuclear free stance, New Zealand walked out of that treaty. Now the same treaty has been, again, though not re-signed, but the similar treaty has been came into existence with Australia, New Zealand and Australia, UK and United States. As I said, this is kind of an entry point for United Kingdom into Indo-Pacific region. Now coming back to the Quad platform, right? What are the core tenets of Quad platform? They are free and open trade, right? Insert Indo-Pacific here, healthcare, critical technologies, and supply chains and capacity building. That was entirely the ethos of Quad grouping. On the other hand, you have AUKUS, which is a submarine deal. So though this might not be comparable to the ethos of Quad, AUKUS deal is nonetheless a significant development in this region. It is essentially a game changer because it empowers Australia to have nuclear powered submarines, right? SSNs and SSBNs in the future, meaning nuclear submarines that can carry intercontinental ballistic missiles in them. But here is the rub. These submarines are not going to be available for Australia in the next few years, right? By 2040 they might get all of their 8 submarines, but in between they'll get 2, 3 or 4 in the timeline is worked over shift. They are not going to get all the submarines in the next 2-3 years. It will take till roughly estimated 2040 to get all of their submarines, but nonetheless that is a very good timeline. So what essentially happening here is this AUKUS agreement, which allows for Australia to have nuclear propelled submarines, increases its capabilities. It is a force multiplier for Australia. So they can conduct longer patrols in the region, they can carry out more covert missions for longer periods of time, they can conduct reconnaissance or whatever missions. It is a force multiplier and capability enhancement for Australia. So this is the difference between Quad and AUKUS. But when you come to China has been very strongly criticizing AUKUS. They are saying that America, UK and other countries in the region are promoting instability. They are stoking a new arms race between countries in the region. But this is where the author is saying that China's hypocrisy lays bare, because China has the fastest growing fleet of submarines, particularly majority of them nuclear propelled, and most of them carry intercontinental ballistic missiles in their arsenal. Now you have your weapons, and when other country in the same region gets similar kinds of weapons, you are making all the noise in the world against that. So that is the hypocrisy of China. So the reality is, at any given point of time, Chinese nuclear submarines are carrying out and conducting operations in Indo-Pacific region. Whatever the operation may be, they are actually prowling or on the prowl in Indo-Pacific region. When the same thing is being done by other countries, China is making all the unnecessary noise. So this is the hypocrisy of China. Australia has every right to choose what it needs, what its nation's needs are. And when it is trying to fulfill one of its critical defense requirements through the help of either America and UK, China is saying that you are going for an arms race. Nonetheless, there is going to be some sort of an element of that, but not the way that Chinese is portraying it to be. Thank you. Stay safe. Namaste.
Borthakur IAS Academy. প্রস্তুতি আৰু অধ্যয়নৰ নিৰ্ভৰযোগ্য ঠিকনা। Borthakur IAS Academy.